This episode is brought to you by Google Gemini. With the Gemini app, you can talk live and have a real-time conversation with an AI assistant. It's great for all kinds of things, like if you want to practice for an upcoming interview, ask for advice on things to do in a new city, or brainstorm creative ideas. And by the way, this script was actually read by Gemini. Download the Gemini app for iOS and Android today. Must be 18 plus to use Gemini Live.
Welcome to No One Told Us, the podcast that tells the truth about parenting and talks about all the stuff you wish you knew before having kids. I'm your host, Rachel Shepard-Ohta, and today I'm speaking with Beth Morel. Beth has been a physical therapist since 2008 and has been treating babies for over 15 years. In that time, she's gone above and beyond the general knowledge of a pediatric physical therapist, diving deep into the airway world, which is so interesting and exciting to me. This is something that I talk about on my Instagram page, Hey Sleepy Baby, all the time, and I'm so excited. Beth works within this world of PT in New Jersey, but she also shares so much information and education for parents on her Instagram platform, Little Movers PT. Beth, thank you so much for joining today. This is, I know, such a big topic. We could probably sit here for like 5 hours and talk about all of this stuff, but I hope that at the end of this episode, people will have a little bit of clarity on the important work that you do. So thank you so much for joining.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited, and I hope to not be so long-winded because, like you said, we can literally talk about this for hours.
I know there's a lot there. There's a lot to geek out about and unpack. And, things like tongue tie and airway have become, I don't want to use the word trendy because they're not trends, but they've become things that people have talked about more now in the parenting space and in the medical spaces. And they're topics that are really misunderstood. So I'm so glad that you're here to kind of help parents demystify this kind of thing. But before we dive into that, I want to just hear a little bit more about you and your own journey. You started as a physical therapist, but you've also mentioned your own kids' kind of journeys through this stuff. So I would love to hear how that's kind of impacted your work.
Okay, to not make this the longest winded story that you'll ever hear, I knew I was going to work with new babies and feeding babies since clinicals. When I got to work in the NICU, I actually placed myself in the NICU. You have to do in PT, you have to do 4 different kinds of clinicals in all different settings. And within that, inpatient, outpatient, either adult or pediatric, like older people or pediatric. And I was like, no, I'm working in the NICU. I made my own clinical. I flew out to California because on the West Coast, that's where you get to do all the fun stuff, being from the East Coast. And so I was like, yes, sign me up, put me in. So I was doing feeding, positioning, and then motor skills in the NICU from clinicals. And I was like, yes, this is it. This is what I want to be doing, helping parents breastfeed, helping parents bottle feed. But then, graduating, coming back to the East Coast, you kind of have to work your way down backwards. So when I became a physical therapist, I started working with preschool kids, then toddlers, and then babies. And then the feeding part of it on the East Coast kind of like left, right? We didn't do as much. It's very compartmentalized where it's like speech does feeding and PT does more gross motor. And so I did a lot of torticollis, which is a buzzword for me too, because I don't really believe that diagnosis is the best diagnosis for most kids either, which we can talk about briefly. But I was doing a lot of torticollis and plagiocephaly, which is flat head and tension and delayed milestones. And then once I had my own kids, right on that first latch, my daughter made me bleed and I was like, oh, hey, I want lactation. And they're like, lady, you literally gave birth 1 second ago. And I was like, literally, I don't care. I need someone here right now. This is not normal. I know anatomy, and they huffed and puffed at me. And the long story short is that she ended up having a tongue tie when everyone told me she didn't. I went to doctors, pediatricians, specialists, 4 lactation consultants who said, oh, your baby's so chubby. Look at how well you're doing. And I'm like, yes, but that's because of my knowledge. But this is not anatomy. And she had every symptom in the book, right? So that's what kind of led me down the path of, well, how common are tongue ties and how is this little string really affecting their body? And that's what kind of made me put all of those pieces together. Because once I got her frenectomy done and I went to the doctor, Scott Siegel, who's literally the best of the best of the best. And I said to him, okay, so who's going to do the rehabilitative, therapy? And he was like, you're it. And I was like, what do you mean Amit? It took me this many people to even get here. He's like, I know, we literally didn't have like rehabilitative therapy at that time for like head to toe, total body. He's like, you could do like some speech, and then you could go to craniosacral, and then you can go to chiropractic. And I was like, okay, but like, who's going to really reteach my baby? And he was like, that's what I said, you're it. So luckily, I know the best course came out right after she was born. She was 10 weeks old, where it kind of put all the pieces together. It was called a class called the IBC LC meets the body worker. And that is when, we kind of put all the pieces together of, oh, you're a physical therapist. You're doing this to this. We're, the IBCLCs, and we're doing assessment here. This is how it works. And I was like, oh, perfect. So that is how I ended up in this, niche in particular, because even when I was working in my special ed preschool as my first job, half of my caseload, the thing I would be talking to parents about is sleep. I would be looking at their faces. They would have venous pooling under their eyes, which is like big purple bags. And I would say, tell me about your kids' sleep habits, because, the issues that we're running into with all of our children, like this is like the biggest issue that we have right now, is our behavioral issues leading to motor issues, leading to sensory issues, and like not kind of behaving well, right? Like they're turning into behavioral issues, but they start and stem with sleep. So I was lucky enough that when I was growing up, my dentist, my regular dentist, called himself a sleep dentist. And he would look in my throat and say, oh, Beth, from the size of your throat, I can tell that you will have sleep apnea as an adult if like you gain weight. If you become an obese individual, you're going to have sleep apnea. You have a flappy throat. You have to be very careful. And so that has always been in my head. How big is my airway? How well am I sleeping? And then pairing that to, oh, now I'm a physical therapist and I'm treating all of these preschool children who are having behavioral difficulties and gross motor difficulties and fine motor difficulties. And how is that interrelated? So my wheels were already turning. Now, when we added on the tongue tie piece, which, the string under the tongue, pulling the tongue down, that leads to your tongue not being in the right position. Your tongue sitting up on the roof of your mouth is what opens your airway. That's what allows you to get max oxygen to your brain. So as soon as I was like, oh, she has a tongue tie, that's going to pull on, that's not going to lead to deep sleep, plus all the other issues that we'll talk about colic, right? But I was like, now it all makes sense. Like my whole life makes sense. Everybody's life makes sense. And all of my worlds kind of collided, from my dentist to my, early NICU days, to my toddler job, to now my baby job. And I was like, yes, now we can finally put all the pieces together. So I feel like it's so taboo, yet so hot topic at the same time that, I spend day in and day out just educating people on all of those pieces and how they're interrelated, whether that's through Instagram, through my job, through, just like talking to people on the street, people, what do you do? And I'm like, oh, well, did you know that your tongue's not in the right position? And then you're going to blah, blah, blah. And they're like, hi, nice to meet you. And I'm like, yeah, sorry, I'm Beth. And this is what I do.
So you were mentioning tongue tie. I mean, you mentioned a lot of different things. We'll kind of get to all of it and touch on all of it. But first, I think probably the thing that parents have maybe heard of before is tongue tie, but not everybody necessarily knows what signs to look for, what the red flags with the tongue tie are, and what other systems of the body can be affected by tongue tie. I think people are often surprised to hear that it can impact sleep, not just feeding, and other things. You mentioned torticollis and all of that. So I would love to kind of hear how it all ties together in your work.
To be specific, everybody has a tongue, lip, and cheek frenum, right? Which is a string that connects your lips and your tongue onto the body. But the question, the piece that's missing is that restrictive? The restrictive part of it makes it a tie, right? So if this piece of tissue, it's all connective tissue, it's fascia. And this is really important to know. The fact that it's fascia is what makes it a problem, because if it was just a muscle that was tight, we could stretch it, bring blood flow to it, bring heat, which would loosen it, and then we could work around it. But because it's fascia and fascia doesn't have good blood flow, that is the reason why we end up needing frenectomies, or choosing, I should say, frenectomies to fix the issue. So if the string under your lip or under your tongue is too tight, it's going to cause functional deficits. And those deficits mean that like your tongue isn't going to be able to curl up like like a hot dog, and hold on to the breast or the bottle along with the cheeks and upper lip and make a vacuum seal. And if you can make a vacuum seal, you're going to either become inefficient at the breast or the bottle. It's going to take a lot of time to drink, or you're going to become messy, like you're going to get air in, right? And the air itself leads to aerophagic reflux, which we'll talk about in a second. But the string pulls the tongue off of the nipple, which makes the tongue not as efficient. It also restricts movement from left and right, forward and up. So all of those movements in particular, those movements of our tongue start off with early infant feeding in terms of breast and bottle feeding, but those are the same movements that we need to do feeding through the rest of our life. Those are the same muscles that we use to create speech sounds, right? Like your tongue needs to hit the palate in 4 places to make speech. And so when it's restricted, those sounds can be altered. Your articulation can be altered. I like to say that it is very similar to running with a tire on your back. So CrossFitters, run with a tire on their back. They put the little waist belt on, they run uphill with the tire on their back. Can they do it? Yes. But does it make their workout that much harder? 100%. So your tongue is supposed to come forward over your gum line, curl around to grasp onto the breast or the bottle to start to create this vacuum seal. And if there's a piece of tissue that is restricting that or pulling that down, then you have to work double or triple as hard to make that seal happen, right? And that's going to lead to compensatory patterns. We're either going to overuse our upper lip, which is what causes those little lip blisters or cobblestone lips that you'll see in babies. It's going to lead to the tongue smacking down, and every time the tongue falls off the nipple, you're going to hear that click sound, right? So you might hear, that might be clue number 1, right? That your baby is every time they drink. But what's more important to note is not the sound. It's that every time your tongue is falling off the nipple, a bubble of air is going directly into that digestive system. So the digestive issues are the things that roll up into those colicky-like symptoms, and colic being a topic in and of itself. But the tongue tie is what causes the tongue to pull down. A lip tie would cause the upper lip to curl under. And if you can't curl under, you can't create that vacuum seal. So the same thing happens again. You're allowing air to get into the system because it's restrictive and pulling and losing the seal. Not to mention the fact that the lip tension will also pull up on the palate. So the tongue forms the palate starting at 10 weeks in utero. So if our tongue is down in our mouth from 10 weeks in utero, when you are a tiny little thing the size of like a pea, right? Like a lentil in there, you are going to come out born with a high arched palate because your tongue suctioning to the roof of your mouth is what creates that shape of the palate. And the palate being the roof of the mouth, that is the start of your upper airway, right? So this is how things start to lead one to the next to the next. So if you have a tongue tie and that started in utero, your tongue wasn't forming the palate in utero, that's when your baby is born with a high palate. So this part is the really funny part to me because all the pediatricians will recognize, oh yeah, your baby just has a high arched palate, but they don't have a tongue tie. Well, ma'am or sir, how are we getting a high arched palate if our tongue was supposed to be doing the right thing? Clearly, there is either restriction or very low tone that is even happening in utero, which is a little bit of an odd thing. Like you don't really get your tone to the very end anyway, to create such a high arched palate. Like one doesn't equate to the other. So, tongue ties being restrictive and pulling down, that is going to be the start of all of your airway issues and your growth issues, right? So if our tongue is responsible for creating the shape of the palate, your tongue is responsible for creating the shape of your face. And this is where, that next step evolves because your tongue And the work it does, pulls these masseter muscles, pulls on your jaw and creates the thickness or width of your jaw. The bigger the jaw, the bigger the airway. The more forward the jaw, the bigger the airway. And so if there is a restriction pulling your chin back, even as your head is growing from the back over the top in utero, you're not only coming out with a high arched palate, but you're coming out with a small recessed chin.
Mm-hmm.
Now, don't get me wrong. Babies are born with recessed chin to be able to breastfeed better. But we're not talking about just a little bit. We're talking about these teeny tiny chins that half of America is born with these days. I mean, it's getting a little bit insane with how much these development, continue on, right? Which is an entirely different talk about epigenetics and genetics, right? Genetically speaking, we know that tongue ties are hereditary. We know that. The cause behind that, whether that's MTHFR or not, that's still all up in the air, heavily debated, yada, yada, yada. But we do know that it's genetic. And what affects our genes is epigenetics. And epigenetics is our genes responding to our environment in real time. So if our environment, is affecting us, whether that's pollution or, global warming or the pesticides, all of those kinds of things is changing your genes in real time. So we're not actually helping ourselves and our children in that way. Thankfully, we are attuned to this these days, and we are more leaning toward our organic fruits and vegetables and, having air filtration systems and all of those things. And we're really learning about all the benefits of that. So hopefully the next couple of generations will then turn around. But right now, genetically speaking, our incidences of tongue tie being genetic and occurring more and more are getting higher and higher, right? I mean, the research article, that was 5 years old at this point, says 26%. 5 years ago. I'm sure by now the numbers are outrageous.
I was going to say, is that because there's just more babies being born with it for some reason, or more people are aware of it and so more babies are getting diagnosed with it, or is it both?
So that's exactly right. That's both, right? Our genetic mutations are getting more and more pronounced, and we are much better at diagnosing it.
Okay.
Listen, there have always been tongue ties here. It says it in the Bible for those who are religious. It's a thing, right? It's always been a thing. I had a 62-year-old grandma in here, a couple of months ago who's like, I got my tongue tie clipped at birth. It has always been a thing, but we are much more attuned to diagnosing it, which leads to your question of what are the symptoms, right? Because you might be at odds with your lactation consultant, your pediatrician, your midwife, your friends, everyone might have a different opinion, but it's really what are your symptoms? And that's really how it should be diagnosed, right? What is the function? What are the symptoms? What is the actual anatomy? What does it look like? And those three pieces together lead to, okay, this is restrictive and we should do something about it. Or in this moment, it is not affecting you. So these babies might have those colic-like symptoms. So spit up itself or silent reflux, which is when you put your baby down and they don't want to be down, and you see swallowing or tongue thrusting, which is also swallowing, or you hear the gurgling in the back of the throat, or even coughing, arching of the back. Those are all, I don't want to be on my back because the milk is coming up. It's not out, but it's coming up. So spit up and silent reflux, the white on the tongue. So that's a big one that also has to go back to that high arched palate, right? If our tongue is supposed to rest on the roof of our mouth to open our airway and it's down, you're going to see some white on the tongue. So your tongue has hair on it called papillae. And that's like having grass, like a lawn, right? And you mow your lawn on the roof of your mouth. And those hairs are grayish in and of itself. So if your tongue's doing the right job and it's constantly mowing the lawn, then it's going to mow off those grayish hairs and your tongue's going to be nice and pink. But if your tongue is down in your mouth and the grass is able to grow longer, if the papillae is able to grow, you're going to have this grayish cast on your tongue. And then the milk is going to come on top of that. Whether that is, I have a very shallow latch, so the milk is actually going on top of my tongue to go down my throat, Or, because remember, our tongue, the nipple's supposed to be in the back of the throat, just going down, right? It's not supposed to be in the front, and the milk's going to go down. So either the milk is going down because there's a shallow latch, or it's coming back up, regurgitated, and sitting on the tongue. So our white tongue is another big indicator of your tongue's not in the right spot. There's restriction there. GI symptoms, lower GI symptoms. So that gurgling of the stomach when they're eating, or explosive stools, right? That can be lower GI, and that could also be food sensitivity as well. But some of that is just that rumbling. Neck and body tension, diaphragm tension, also comes from this tongue tie. So the other part about the tongue, the tongue is supposed to form the roof of the mouth, but then where is the actual piece of fascia connected to is all the way down to the toes. So your tongue is connected to your toes via your deep fascial chain. That is your tongue, your neck, your diaphragm, your hips and pelvic floor, your inner thighs, your calves, and your feet. That is one piece of tissue. So if this one piece of tissue is pulled from the top, then everything else is going to have that slight pull on it, right? Now, the way the neck gets involved is from that in utero positioning. Us as women, most women tend to work more now. So we are sitting, we're not moving and just doing laundry all day long, and our babies are not flipping and flapping all the time. They tend to pick one spot once they're head down, hopefully head down, once they're head down, and stay there. And that one position causes in utero constraint. They kind of like come out like this, and that's the spot that they're in. So along with that deep fascial chain, the tongue is already pulling on that side. Now the baby's going to go into that position of ease of the way they sat in utero, which does coincide with which side your baby sat on most typically. So if your baby sat LOA, head down, butt on your left, feet kicking you in those right ribs, that tends to put you left ear to left shoulder and left banana curve on the inside where your head looks to the right. And so if you have a tongue tie and it's pulling, your body's going to go in the position of ease, which is then going to go in that same position. So it enhances that kind of in utero position when there's a tongue tie involved in that. As humans, we go to the position of ease in general, right? Like we slouch because it's easier. We do all things in position of ease. And then the opposite way, the RA, head down, butt on your right, feet on your left, is even tighter because that's where the organs are. So if your baby sits RA and comes out and has a tongue tie, they're really going to be stuck with their right ear to their right shoulder, that banana curve leaning into that right side, head looking left. But those babies tend to be even tighter because they were squished on that side as well as having that positioning. So
wow, that's so fascinating.
Yeah. So, I mean, we get the diagnosis of torticollis in the office all the time, but it's not just torticollis. Torticollis is the SCM. It's one muscle that's tight and short. And that's not the case of these babies. These babies often have tongue ties with that tongue to toe pull, that tension pattern, leaning into that side. So yes, is there SEM tight on that side? For sure. But that's not what's happening. It's in utero constraint. It's in a whole body tension pattern on the one side. So, that's going to be another symptom that your baby is facing. And then, is your baby hungry because they're underfed, because they're having too much trouble transferring? Okay. And then sleep. Obviously, sleep is going to affect all these things. Is your baby overly full because they're getting in a ton of air as they feed, but mom has a great supply? So those babies get even more left, by themselves to the wayside because, your baby's fat and happy. Oh, my baby might be fat, but they're sure as heck not happy. Mm-hmm. And, the trend that I see, I won't speak to all pediatricians, but the trend that I see is if your baby is gaining weight, none of these issues exist, right? Yep. All babies have colic and you'll get over it and 6 weeks is a peak and like excuse after excuse, it's just kind of pushed off, right? But this baby that is being fed because they're lucky their mom has a high supply or a fast supply often tends to have more of those GI symptoms. They're going to be the ones that have the silent reflux and the spit up because of the layers of milk, air from that tongue clicking down, from that lip pulling up, from that non-vacuum seal, and we call that aerophagic reflux. So,
okay. I'm just like putting so many things together right now because all three of my kids have tongue ties, but my last two, like you said, like they were getting enough because I had such a good supply. Like they would just open their mouth and I could literally spray into them and they'd get enough.
Right.
Like but I got mastitis and clogged ducts over and over and over again because they were not efficiently feeding. So I would say that's another one where even if your child is gaining weight, but you are suffering with symptoms, like that's also a sign. You need to push for getting that diagnosis.
Mastitis, exactly. But mastitis also comes from compression. So not only did you have the oversupply, but if they grab onto the breast because they're using their gum line, because their tongue is not efficient, they are going to clog your ducts. So you have like having a high supply is a negative in this situation because it's much easier to compress and to get mastitis in someone who has a high supply. And, people might blame it on like whole body inflammation or that just the fact that, oh, well, your supply is so high. That's why you got to mastitis. No, the baby is going to clamp down and clog it. And that leads to other things like vasospasms, right? Vasospasms is just a compression. If you're taking your baby off and a minute later or 2 minutes later, your nipple's white, or you get shooting pains in the breast throughout the day, that is a sign that your baby is compressing at the breast. Whether they get enough milk or not, it doesn't make it a good thing, right?
Exactly.
So all of these things kind of go hand in hand. And plagiocephaly in and of itself is another thing that is literally enhanced because of the tongue tie. Because if your tongue sits on the roof of your mouth, it also creates a negative pressure in your head. So when you lie a baby down, if their mouth is open or their tongue is down, there is no negative pressure. So if you suction your tongue to the roof of your mouth, you can feel in your face the pressure that it causes, right? That's a negative pressure that keeps your bones, pushes your bones out against gravity, against the forces upon it. But if your tongue is down, there is nothing counteracting that pressure. So the baby's already stuck to the one side. It's pulled down because the tongue tie is enhancing that in utero constrained position. Now the tongue is down and there's nothing pushing back against the mattress that's pushing on you. Voila, plagiocephaly. It's not just, oh, your baby had torticollis and now they have a flat head. No, it has to do with the pressure in the mouth as well. So like the tongue frenulum and being able to not have that tension pattern like does all of these things, right? And the baby will have a plethora of symptoms, or the mom will have a plethora of symptoms. Pain alone is not normal. Pain alone is like symptom number one. And weight gain is just not good enough to say, well, your baby's fine. Because that's what I got too. I literally
that's
had to put
gaslighting.
Yeah, exactly. I had to put in a night guard to feed my first because it was so painful and she couldn't take a bottle. Why do you think she couldn't take a bottle? That I was like, went to my pediatrician. I was like, look at my nipple. This is not normal. And after I got the diagnosis and she was like, well, I saw the lip tie, but your baby was gaining enough weight. And I literally was like, you're done. I am done with you.
Yeah.
We are done here.
You'll never see me again. Bye-bye.
Yes. Goodbye. Because I cannot believe the ignorance there just because my baby's gaining weight. And I cried to you. Like I said, look at my nipple. This is not okay. We need to be listening. Moms know best.
Yeah,
I said
absolutely.
this to mom the other day. We were having like a back and forth of, do we think this is your diet or is it all anatomical issues? And she was like, I totally hear what you're saying, but my last two babies, as soon as I weaned whatever I was eating or whatever was in that, their gas issues went away. She, not denying it, tongue tie, it had nothing to do with that. It was just like, was it food or not? And I said, okay, you know best, right? If this is what you feel in your gut and you feel like this is what's happening, then that's it. Let's roll with that, because we have to be honest in the fact that the gut feeling that's happening is usually correct. I mean, listen, you and me talking right now are going to trigger some people's thought processes to say, oh, shoot, I never knew that. And you don't know what you don't know, but usually you have the gut feeling of like, there was something more.
For
or
sure.
my pain was related to that, or their sleep was related to this. It's not just, you know, I didn't think anything was going on. And now all of a sudden you're telling me that like these things are happening, and it's like a light bulb went off and I never thought anything about it. Usually you're like, this is how we put the pieces together.
Exactly.
You know?
And it's like, that's exactly it. It's like a puzzle. And once you start to learn about how all of these things are connected, like you've been talking about, everything just starts to line up and makes so much sense. Even for me, like I've done so much education around this and I educate other people about it. And even me, while you're talking, I'm like, oh yeah, I noticed that. Or, oh yeah, like I'm still putting the pieces together about how many different parts of the body are affected by this. So I want to dive into that when we come back from the break and talk a little bit about the body and body work. We'll be right back. Parenting is hard, but this is easy. Listen to Stroller Coaster. Hosted by Lynn Smith, a mom and former news anchor for NBC, and coasted by an improv comedian, Stroller Coaster is a place to be entertained, laugh over crazy parenting moments, and learn something new. Stroller Coaster was voted Best Branded Podcast 2024 by Digiday, and Stroller Coaster is an award-winning, top-ranked parenting podcast created by Munchkin, which is one of the most loved baby lifestyle brands in the world. I just got done listening to their transitions episode and I really resonated with it. And I just loved how they were talking about kids really needing to have that connection piece before we can expect them to follow directions or to transition easily or to get their shoes on, get out of the door, get in the car. I just felt so seen as a toddler mom. And this season, they're talking about things that we really all should be talking about, like how to stay connected with our kids once they're in daycare, how to hold on to your patience as a parent, why kids are so obsessed with snacking, and the hilarious but important process of making friends with other parents. So be sure to check out Stroller Coaster wherever you get your podcasts. Okay, I know that days are shorter now that it's winter, but my to-do list is still a mile long. And one thing that helps me get through busy days and busy weeks is Factor. So you can also power through your busy days with Factor's no prep, no mess meals. From breakfast to dinner and anything in between, Factor has easy, super nutritious, and delicious options to keep you fueled up and feeling your best. My husband is also obsessed with Factor meals. He's always asking when our next box is going to arrive. He loves making them for a quick lunch while he's busy with the kids during the day, and he wants something that's going to be, quick but also super nutrient dense and really, really healthy. There's truly something for everyone. Factor has you covered with 35 different delicious meals every single week and 60 additional convenience options that you can add to your box, like pressed juices and smoothies, so that you can just grab and go, because we're parents, we're so busy. And sometimes when I'm solo at night or when we just need to make something quick for the kids after a day full of school and activities, so that's where Factor comes in. One of my favorites right now is the truffle butter filet mignon. It is absolutely amazing. It tastes straight from a restaurant. So you can head to factormeals.com/50 no one told us and use code 50 no one told us to get 50% off your first box plus free shipping. That's code 50 no one told us at factormeals.com/50 no one told us to get 50% off your first box plus free shipping while your subscription is active. Before the break, we were talking all about tongue tie and the different symptoms that you might be looking for. And people are probably wondering like, okay, I have those symptoms. So now what do I do? And I think a lot of pediatricians might say, oh, we can just clip that for you right here. What's the benefit to that? Or is that a bad idea? What should parents do first if they suspect that there's a tie?
Well, great question. This is like the ultimate question, right? First things first, I feel like when you suspect that your baby has a tie, it depends also on what age your baby is, right? And where you are in the world and who's around you to help. First and foremost, lactation consultants can be invaluable in part of this process, right? How can they help you position your baby? Can they confirm that your issues are suspected, occurrence with a tongue tie? And if you're already on board with them, great. And if not, they are an integral part of this puzzle. And just like therapists, we are all not created equal. I'm a physical therapist, which I would say is less common, who works with these babies, or occupational therapist or a speech therapist, and we all kind of have our place. So you have to find the people around you that understand these issues and how to put them all together, whether that is airway related, tension related, does this have to do with a food sensitivity? So finding that the right team is kind of crucial, but the person that you don't need to run to is the dentist or the ENT. That's the person you don't need to run to. Yes, they are a crucial part of this, and they have diagnosing power. As a physical therapist, we don't diagnose. I mean, I can say there is restrictive tissue here that is consistent with tethered oral tissues, and these are the parts of the body that are affected with these tension patterns. But I don't say your baby has a tongue tie, that's your diagnosis. Now we're going to go here. So the doctor, the ENT, or a facial surgeon, whoever you have around you that's really trained in ties, they're going to be the one to give you that final diagnosis. But we give our functional and clinical opinions on what else is going on. So, as a physical therapist, but I also practice craniosacral therapy, it's kind of twofold, right? Because in my office, I'm going to be working on those tension patterns. The moment I get my hands on your baby, we're just going to be chatting through with what's going on. And I'm already assessing your baby clinically, and through craniosacral is so gentle and starting to open up your baby. And everyone's like, what is this voodoo that you're doing to my child? She cries all day long. She's bouncing in your arms. But then comes the functional aspect of it, right? Now, what does the tongue do? Is it moving left and right? Is it coming out? Is it lifting up? Does it create a suction in the roof? What is the tension around the mouth? Let's look at the eyes. We're looking at facial symmetry or asymmetry. And then you go basically from head to toe. What does our fontanelle look like? What do all the sutures in our head look like? How did your birth affect those sutures? Did you fly out, right? With a precipitous birth? Did you have prodromal labor and you were stuck in that canal for days, weeks, hours, whatever? What do those sutures look like to what do the eyes look like? Ear shape, crooked smile, jaw symmetry, which has to do with how your baby was sitting in utero there too. Neck, shoulder height, winging shoulders, winging scapula. How about arms? Do they go up? Do they come up and flap around like a rag doll where you're like, oh my God, my baby's slipping out of my arms? That's your muscle tone. Your head lag, so pull to sit, if your baby's head doesn't come up and it stays back, is a really good indicator of your baby's muscle tone. And the way you pick your baby up by the armpits, how those armpits feel, is the second great indicator of muscle tone when you're like checking out your own baby and when I'm checking out babies. And then we move down, what do the nipples look like? Are they symmetrical? What does our diaphragm look like? Are our ribs flared? Are our babies breathing through their diaphragm and their ribs? Or are they shoulder breathing? Or are they belly breathing? Babies are not supposed to belly breathe. Babies are born to use their diaphragm appropriately, which means you inhale, your diaphragm pulls down, your ribs widen, your shoulders stay low. You exhale, your ribs come in, your diaphragm relaxes and stretches all the way up to your mid-chest, and everything comes down. Most of us are like, because we are so tight, so overworked, stuck in fight or flight, so we're assessing that. Then we're looking at our belly button and our midline. All babies are born with a diastasis, but how big is that diastasis? Can I put my fingers in it? Does that baby do a crunch and they cone like some women do when they have a diastasis in pregnancy? Is their belly button popping out? Do they have an umbilical hernia? Hint, 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 midline issue, right? A lot of tongue ties come with midline issues. Move down. What do their hip heights look like? Is one leg stuck? Is one hip hiked up? It's probably going to be hiked up because that's going to go in the same, that hip hike is going to be higher on the same side where the ear is lower when you're in that Badata curve, right? How bowed are those tibias? Your shins, how bowed are they? Are your feet turned in? Are your feet stuck? Do you have the quote unquote tongue tie toes, which mean, when the toes fold over each other, because that's the end of that deep fascial chain. And you turn them around. What are their butt creases? What do their thigh creases look like? Do they have symmetrical thigh creases, or do they have 3 on this side and 2 on this side? What does their butt crack look like? And what are the top of their butt cheeks look like? Is it asymmetrical? Is there a big dent on the center? When you squeeze their butts together, does that crease veer off all the way to one side? How about the inside? Is there a sacral dent or a sacral dimple? Another midline issue that kind of goes hand in hand with these things. You can have a sacral dent, which is like a little deep pocket where you have to do extra wiping, or you can have as much as a sacral dimple, which literally looks like a puckered, like an anus, which is a way bigger issue if you were to have a sacral dimple, because your spinal cord, where it ends, comes out into all the nerve endings that looks like a horse's tail, called your cauda equina. The cauda equina can be tethered onto that dimple, and that means it's pulling on those nerves, and we call that tethered cord.
Wow.
And those nerve endings are usually like L5, S1, 2, 3, 4, which is calves, hamstrings, butt, and your continence. So if that's get pulled and suctioned onto the back of the bum, then those nerves are going to be pulled. So you might have weaker glutes, weaker thighs, weaker calves. Your baby isn't going to be potty trained well. But it is a midline issue. So we have to keep all of these things in mind when we're assessing. And then you go back up and you're like, okay, what do their shoulder blades look like? What do the shoulders look like from the back? And what does the back of the head look like? So you've kind of like gone all the way around and up. And all of these different things lead into one, into the other, into the other. And like they all play a role in terms of what is your baby's demeanor, their demeanor itself, their ability to feed, their ability to sleep. And they all lead into that same diagnosis or not diagnosis of that word colic, right? Because our pediatricians really dislike at this time leaning into the tongue tie causing all of those issues. So even if your baby does get a diagnosis of tongue tie, they'll still say like, well, your baby has colic, and that colicky baby leads into all of those sleep issues.
Right. And well, I was going to say too, like a lot of times babies will eventually kind of quote unquote grow out of the colic. The issue might not actually be addressed, but things will get better as far as the crying. And then sometimes sleep might get a little better as baby gets older too. And so sometimes we see older babies who were never diagnosed with a tongue tie or who never got the tongue tie addressed. Maybe a parent is listening right now who has a toddler already, but they're like, oh my God, I noticed all of those things when my child was an infant. This makes so much sense. I wouldn't say there's a lot of support for little babies with tongue tie, but I think there's even less information out there for older babies and toddlers and kids. Is there a benefit to fixing it once they're not a baby anymore, once they're on solid foods, once they're sleeping through the night? Like, is there a point in fixing it, or what do you think?
100%. I mean, it becomes way more dicey in terms of the when, right? So you said like, oh, is there a benefit to therapy? Yes, because we're going to fix all of those things from the head to the toe that we just saw. We're going to start working on those things. And then at some point be like, okay, this baby's good enough to go get the tongue tie release. And that could be very quick for a newborn baby, right? We start working on the neck opening and the body opening and the alignment and the symmetry, but we also don't want mom to have bleeding nipples for the next, year of her life. So when we feel like they're open enough to get released, we send them out for that evaluation and frenectomy when needed. For a toddler, it's going to be even more so, because that same frenulum that could be stuck can affect their speech, can affect their solid food eating. I mean, I can't tell you how many adults still eat and drink from a straw incorrectly and have no idea. I have a client right now who said, Beth, I hadn't tongue thrust until like a year ago because, I was in speech so many times. I had braces so many times, and I was aware that I had a tongue thrust, and I worked with a speech therapist, but I wasn't aware that it was my tongue tie that caused the tongue thrust that made me, have all these years. And she's an actress and a singer, right? And so how important is that for them? So it can continue to affect you. So we do want to address it because it can affect feeding, solid food feeding, your speech, but most importantly, airway. And your tongue forms your palate over the first 3 to 5 years of life. And so those years are the most critical to free the tongue, to get it on the roof of the mouth, for the tongue to hope to do the right thing, to kind of like regain a lot of the things that you may or may not have lost in that time. Not to say that there isn't mechanical treatment as well. You know, my kids had their tongues released at birth. They've had me, they've had all the body workers that you could possibly think of, because I'm a crazy person. And they still have palate expanders because they have low tone, right? Mm-hmm. And when you have low tone, it's different than strength. Like tone makes your muscle fiber either more taut or more wiggly, because the neurological impulse going into it is slower. So it makes you essentially a little bit more flappy at rest. And that, I knew my kids were never going to get the airways that they need, especially based on their parents' genetics, right? Yeah. I have a tiny throat. My husband has sleep apnea, and they were doomed.
So same. My husband, I swear, still has a tongue tie, and he refuses to do anything about it. He sleeps with his mouth wide open. He snores. Our son has a palate expander and like has had thousands of dollars of orthodontia already at this point, because his airway was so tiny. He had the recessed chin, all of that. Yeah. So I just love that you educate parents on how this all goes together and how it can affect us throughout our entire life. And it's not to scare people, but it's really just to make people more aware. So I really appreciate you for spreading all of this amazing information. We'll be right back.
Come on, Mufasa. Let's get in some trouble.
Tomorrow, destiny awaits you. You can grab your friends and experience Mufasa the Lion King in 3D.
Everything the light touches belongs to me.
You'll have to take it. Don't miss the perfect family Christmas movie.
Now went swimmingly, if I say so myself.
Disney's Mufasa the Lion King.
Oh, yeah, that looks good.
In theaters tomorrow. Rated PG. Parental guidance suggested. Tickets on sale now.
Hey, it's Austin James. Yes, I'm living with diabetes, but it doesn't have to define me. Thanks to the Freestyle Libre 3 Plus sensor, I get real-time glucose readings throughout the day. The Freestyle Libre 3 Plus sensor is small and easy to wear, giving me the freedom to focus on my life as a parent and a musician. Now this is progress. You can get a free sensor at freestylelibre.us.
Offer available for people who qualify. Visit myfreestyle.us to see all terms and conditions. Certain exclusions apply. Data on file. Abbott Diabetes Care. For prescription only. Safety info found at freestylelibre.us.
Okay, so where can people find more about this? Because like I said at the beginning of the episode, we could talk here for like 5 hours plus on all of this stuff, but
right.
How can people kind of come to your page or come to your website and take the information that they need? Where can they find you?
My Instagram is where I have almost all my content, which is at Little Movers PT. And I have an entire platform of education. I will say most of my education is from 0 to 1 years old. That being our oral motor courses, our infant movement, getting rid of those tension patterns that we're born with, and then continuing on all the way through walking, because the same pattern that you were in utero with is still going to try to come back and bite you in the butt, right? So we still need to be working on that, plus reflex integration, which we didn't even get into, which is a huge thing about sleep. But when babies move less, because we're dealing with all of these issues, you know, we're there working on the breastfeeding, working on the bottle feeding, getting rid of the tongue tie. Our babies tend to get less of that innate organic movement of, you know, rolling around, all that kind of stuff. So they tend to have more heightened primitive reflexes and non-integrated primitive reflexes. And those reflexes stay with us lifelong, right? You know, I'm sure everyone has the friend where you walk in the room and they didn't know you're there and they're still jumping 10 feet in the air. That affects you, right? Someone drops a pencil in class and your son is like, oh, you dropped a pencil? Oh, by the way, what are you doing? And they're gone, right? Like they're lost. That's a primitive reflex that is stuck in them, called retained reflex, that they're gone for. And that's also the same reflex that affects your sleep. So we need to be working on all of these reflexes. So I have all of that on my platform. I do help parents also get to the right providers when they're the older kids, but my main group is that like 0 to 1. And I completely forgot that I wrote a book on this, which is about to be published.
Oh my God,
it's
amazing.
Just like your podcast. It's actually like the things that no one told us about sleep. And it is all of these root causes, including reflex integration issues and food sensitivities, eczema, like you had up the other day.
Oh my gosh. You'll have to send it to me. I need to read this.
Definitely. It's just all these root causes that, okay, this is what the issue is. This is how food sensitivity is. This is how it's going to affect your sleep. This is
Incredible.
what a tongue tie is. This is how it's going to affect your sleep. This is what aerophage reflex is. This is how it's going to affect your sleep. And it's very validating,
Oh my God,
right?
I'm so excited for this.
Yeah. I've had it for a year and it's just sitting on my computer.
Oh my God. You need to get it to me. I need this. This sounds amazing.
I just need your assistant. Okay. Give me your assistant.
I will happily loan her to you to get this done because this is the book that we all need. Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Beth. And I hope everybody will come check you out. And you have so many amazing resources and you're such a great wealth of knowledge for parents. So I really appreciate you being here to talk us through some of this.
Thank you so much for having me. We'll chat for part 2.
Yes, part 2 on the reflexes thing. That's fascinating to me. Let's do a part 2.
You got it.
All right. Have a good rest of your day.
Bye.
Thank you.
Are you a parent in need of a laugh and a little escape? Look no further. Parenting is a Joke is the podcast you've been waiting for. Hey, I'm Ophira Eisenberg. I'm a stand-up comic and parent. And each week I chat with one of my top comedian pals who, just like you, are juggling careers, busy lives and schedules, and raising a family. You can expect candid stories, hilarious mishaps that happen on stage and at home, and just a lot of laughs. There's no expert advice here. Well, actually, sometimes a good idea does sneak its way in, but mostly just pure, relatable fun to remind you that we're all in this parenting adventure together. New episodes of Parenting is a Joke drop every Tuesday, so tune in, get ready to laugh, unwind, and maybe even feel a little bit better about your own parenting. Because sometimes that's exactly what your therapist, pediatrician, and bartender ordered. Subscribe now on your favorite podcast platform.